It's a very unseasonably warm day in Birmingham. It must be about 16 or 17 degrees, I think it reached today. On the 15th of February, it's unusual to say the least. I've come for a walk. You don't need a coat really. Well, it's raining slightly, so you would need a coat, but that's all. I mean, just a shirt, no pullover is required. And it must be 4:30 in the afternoon, I think, by now. This kind of weather is slightly unsettling. I've been feeling quite anxious since this morning. It's unusual to find one doesn't know quite what to do. Is it global warming? I don't know about all that. I'm a skeptic of global warming. I remain a skeptic. I suspect that there's something afoot. I do believe that weather modification is a real than possible thing, and so what better time to do it? But, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist. These are just theories. They're not carved in stone. I think the idea that carbon dioxide is killing us is far-fetched, but you know, I'm no scientist. And I spent an hour or so this morning watching a video criticising, or not criticising, but discussing what happened to Castaneda and his party after Castaneda died, I think in the late 90s. Of liver cancer, reportedly, and 5 members of his party went missing. They were women. They were referred to as the witches. They would have been the other members of his party, the parties that were formed according to the books by the various Naguals or seers, and they formed little groups. And they interacted, and it was suggested that Castaneda had formed something of a harem, and this may indeed be true. He would have been a very wealthy man. There's a lot of suggestion that he was indeed just a fraud, and he made the whole thing up. All his encounters with Don Juan and all the stories of sorcery are just pure invention. And then they try to link him to cultic movements, and it's quite possible that he was involved in these things. He set up this tensegrity movement or practice at his retreat in Los Angeles, which he bought with all the money. I mean, he must have made a tremendous amount. And money does tend to create a bit of confusion in the world. But all the cult claims, I suppose the idea really being promoted is that, or being suggested is that there was a sort of suicide pact, that after Castaneda died of liver cancer, which seems odd, you know, considering his great spiritual understanding and his total harmony with the spiritual world. You wouldn't normally think that liver cancer would be something that would come and claim you. But what do I know about these things? I am skeptical about cult claims. The Heaven's Gate cult, where the Heaven's Gate one, and the other one was the Jonestown mass suicide, the two events that are mainly referenced. I think Heaven's Gate, maybe 20 or so people reportedly committed suicide together, and then of course Jonestown, it was in 900 or so, quite a shocking event indeed, a very shocking event. There are photographs of it. But, you know, if you look into these things carefully, There's an awful lot of truthers who've looked at the photographs, have hunted around and looked at the narratives, and when you start to read these things, it's very clear that there's been CIA involvement from the word go in these things. And it is suggested that the photographs showing all the bodies, all the lifeless bodies in the jungle, are just posed. There's nobody died at all, but that narrative was created and put out there, as they say. What do I know? But certainly Castaneda would have been pretty close to the CIA, I think. His influence was too vast to assume that he was just some student who walked into the desert and met a medicine man. There's far more to it than that. And also the accounts that he's written are very coherent and very convincing, I find. Apart from the descriptions of the altered states of consciousness, which are far too subjective really to be able to make any sensible assessment. But the sequence of events and the description of the practices of sorcery are extremely coherent and very credible, I think. The way that things are described, they seem very natural. I mean, Castaneda was an extraordinarily good writer, and it does seem to me that quite possible that the first books were written in awareness of how everything was going to develop. So that would seem to suggest that there was a hidden hand, and I'm sure there have been hidden hands. The narrative is too important to just assume it came about. If people need to look into authors particularly. Authors are very important. Because they write narratives, and the narratives that they write can be used. George Orwell or Eric Blair is another man who can be researched, and some interesting matters can emerge. And also Aldous Huxley, brother of Julian Huxley. These are connected people. Whether they are brothers in arms in the Freemasons or not, I do not know. But there's definitely something more to it than just a creative person sitting quietly and writing. The books are so powerful as well, and I think you can say this about really all literature to a greater or lesser extent, that there's a hand behind it. This has become my conviction. It's another reason why I value the authorized version so greatly, because I think it is the only source of truth that one can take without skepticism. Although I approached it with great skepticism, we need to look at both sides of every argument. It's very important. And I continue to do that with Castaneda, with anything else that comes within my sphere of attention. I spent 3 years really with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Carl Sagan and all the usual suspects in the world of atheism, and researched it all. I became very familiar with the arguments, and I enjoyed them and found them quite convincing initially. But as I proceeded in that course, they started to fall apart for various reasons. They just didn't hold together epistemologically and in terms of rational inquiry. There were gaping holes, and I began to see them. So, that was my background to starting to read the Bible, and then to my surprise, I found a narrative, as it were, that was of a very different nature and has so far withstood the test of time and it's not going to change. I mean, I will be a believer when I die. I'm absolutely convinced of it. I'm not going to change this. I can't. It's not because I'm too committed to it, just because it's true. I've realised this. But yeah, I mean, I'm speaking of Castaneda in some of the podcasts that I do, or whatever they're called, videos, and people need to look at the arguments against. Of course, it's very important to get a feel for these things. I really recommend. I'm sure people do it, but just look at things from both sides. A lot of people don't. This is the problem, isn't it? It's like with the flat earth things. People just refuse to go down that rabbit hole, and they just stick their fingers in their ears. But you might be surprised. You really might be surprised when you start to look carefully at things. Such a nice spot under this tree. I'm going to call it a bay tree for the time being, but I think it's just quite a small trunk here. This small one, not the large one. I think so. I'm not sure. No, it's not that one. I'm wrong. But if it is a bay tree, then bay leaves are very, very healthy. They can be used to make tea. I'm wary a little bit because there are poisonous leaves that resemble bay leaves, and I want to be 100% sure before I start drinking tea. But it was my Sikh friend who taught me this, and he has a bay tree in his garden, and he always gives me leaves when I go and see him. And I make tea out of them, and I think it purifies the blood. I think that's what it does. I can't completely remember, but I mean, these are God's herbs, and this is what I think this is so important for our health, that we recognize that we have these wonderful healing plants and use them. I like a cup of coffee as much as anybody else, but that's not a healing. Well, it has healing properties, but there are many other things that grow wild around us without having to go to the pharmacy or even to the health food shop. They actually just grow out in the wild. Various different types of mushrooms. My friend picks turkey tails, which are very good against cancer. He's even found, I think, a chaga mushroom, which is not usually found in these latitudes. But yeah, so whether this one is indeed a bay tree or not, if you don't see me come back with another one of my annoying videos, then maybe it means it wasn't, and I have expired. God bless everybody this evening.